All right, let's get straight into it. We're going to cut through the noise and look at the hard data behind a brutal, repeating cycle: the relationship between wealth, inequality, and war.
It's the question on everyone's mind, right? And you always hear the same answers. Better policies, more education, tax reform, the usual stuff. But what if I told you that on a grand scale, none of those peaceful solutions have ever really worked? What if, for literally thousands of years, the real answer has been something much, much more violent? That is the uncomfortable truth we are unpacking today. Yeah, when you look at the historical record, a grim pattern emerges, and it challenges everything we think we know about how economies are supposed to work. This is the core argument from Stanford historian Walter Scheidel. And look, after digging through millennia of economic data, his conclusion is just stark. He says peaceful reforms, they just nibble around the edges. Only massive, violent shocks have ever truly reset the system. He's got a name for this. He calls it the Great Leveling. The idea is simple, and it's brutal. Across civilizations, from ancient Rome all the way to the modern world, the only things powerful enough to flatten extreme wealth have been violent. So what are these forces? Scheidel breaks it down into four distinct types of catastrophe that have acted as these great levelers. He calls them the four horsemen of leveling. So here they are. First, mass mobilization war. Think World War I and II. Second, you have transformative revolutions that completely tear down the old system. Third, total state collapse, where everything you think you own suddenly becomes worthless. And finally, number four, catastrophic plagues like the Black Death, stuff so lethal it completely reprices the value of everything, especially human labor. Now, while all four of these have done the job at different times in history, the data from the last century points overwhelmingly to one that has been the most brutally effective leveler of our modern world, and that's mass war. And we're not talking about just any conflict. We're talking about mass mobilization warfare, the kind of total war that sucks entire nations, not just professional armies. This is the force that completely reshaped the economic map of the 20th century. And here is the absolute key. The main economic victim of total war isn't just buildings or infrastructure. No, it's the concentrated capital, the fortunes held by the super rich. The very structure of their wealth is incredibly vulnerable when a nation goes to war. So how does this actually happen? Well, first you got the obvious physical destruction of assets, factories, real estate, you name it. Then the government steps in, big time, controlling prices, production, the whole shebang. To pay for the war, they jack up taxes, specifically on high incomes and massive fortunes. At the same time, inflation goes wild, which wipes out the value of loans, hitting the wealthy creditors. And finally, the need for soldiers and factory workers gives huge political power to labor, leading to stronger unions and higher wages. That squeezes the wealth gap from the bottom up. Look, this isn't just a good story. Schaidel's entire argument is built on a mountain of hard economic data that shows this happening, step by step. So let's look at the clearest piece of evidence, from the period covering both world wars. The impact on the wealthiest people in society wasn't a slow decline. It was like falling off a cliff. This right here is the proof. Just look at this chart. Each one of these lines is the income share of the top 1% in a major country. Before 1914, see how they're all bunched up near the top? They're taking home up to 20% of all the money. Now watch what happens when the wars hit. Boom! It's not a gentle slope down. It is a synchronized collapse across every single country. This was not an accident. It was a direct consequence of war. So what was really driving this? Was it just bombs blowing things up? No. The data shows it was a deliberate, systematic takedown of elite wealth, all driven by what the state needed to survive a war. So how'd they do it? This chart shows you the two key weapons. The lines at the top, those are the top marginal tax rates. Look at them. They rocket skyward during the war, hitting over 90% in places. Meanwhile, the line on the bottom shows union membership. That's labor's power, also surging. It was a pincer movement on wealth, taxes crushing down from the top while wages pushed up from the bottom. So what was the final result? Well, across the 7 major countries that were hit hardest by the world wars, the wealth share of the richest 1% fell on average by a staggering 1/3. That's not a correction. That is a fundamental reset of the entire economic order. So the lesson here isn't about innovation or how to build a fortune. No, the biggest financial story of the 20th century was about a violent compression that completely changed who owned what. When you boil it all down, the pattern is brutally simple. During long stretches of peace, wealth concentrates at the top. Inequality grows. But mass war violently throws that entire process into reverse. It destroys capital and forces political decisions that flatten the wealth structure.
And this leads us to a really unsettling place. Today, with global inequality back at historic highs, this pattern from the past serves as a stark warning. The real question is, can we find a new way to solve this? A fifth horseman, maybe, but one that isn't violent? Because as far as the data is concerned, history has never seen a peaceful solution.